painful, uncomfortable truth. We are living in a moment where power politics are back with a vengeance, and pretending otherwise is a luxury we no longer have. I've spent my career studying how great powers behave, how states pursue survival, and how illusions about morality often collapse when they collide with reality. Right now, whether you like him or despise him, Donald Trump matters enormously to how the world is evolving. So here's my question for you, and I want you to think carefully before you answer it. Are we judging Trump based on how we wish the world worked, or based on how international politics works? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this debate goes to the heart of where the United States is headed. I approach international politics from a realist perspective, and realism starts with one basic fact. The international system is anarchic. There is no higher authority above states, no global police force, no referee to blow the whistle when rules are broken. States live in a world where survival is the primary goal, and power is the currency that determines outcomes. This is not cynicism. This is how the system has functioned for centuries, regardless of who occupies the White House. Trump matters right now because he openly rejects the comforting myths that have guided American foreign policy since the end of the Cold War. For decades, American leaders told themselves and the public that spreading democracy, expanding NATO, and promoting liberal values would naturally lead to peace and stability. The historical record simply does not support that belief. Trump, often crudely and inconsistently, has challenged that entire framework. Let me be very clear about something. I am not saying Trump is a master strategist. I am not saying he carefully reads balance of power theory or sits around thinking about structural realism. What I am saying is that his instincts often align with a brutal reality that many elites refuse to acknowledge. Great powers pursue their own interests, and they resist encroachment near their borders. Take NATO expansion. For years, I warned that pushing NATO eastward toward Russia's borders would produce a severe backlash. That wasn't ideology, it was basic realism. Russia, like any great power, sees military alliances near its borders as a direct threat. Trump questioned NATO's purpose, demanded burden sharing, and treated the alliance as transactional rather than sacred. That shocked the foreign policy establishment, but from a realist perspective, it forced allies to confront hard facts about power and responsibility. Trump also matters because he disrupts the moralistic language that has dominated American discourse. Leaders often talk as if America acts selflessly, as if interventions are driven by humanitarian concern rather than strategic interest. That narrative is deeply ingrained, and it is deeply misleading. Trump stripped away much of that rhetoric and replaced it with a blunt, sometimes ugly focus on America first. While the phrase offends many, it reflects what every great power actually practices, whether they admit it or not. Now, consider China. The rise of China is the most important geopolitical development of the 21st century. This is not speculation. It is a structural fact. When a state grows powerful, it seeks regional dominance. The United States did exactly that in the Western Hemisphere, and China is now doing it in East Asia. Trump treated China not as a partner in a liberal order, but as a strategic competitor. Trade wars, technology restrictions, and open confrontation replaced the fantasy of endless engagement. Again, the execution was often chaotic, but the diagnosis was closer to reality than what came before. Trump matters because he accelerates a shift that was going to happen anyway. The unipolar moment is over. American primacy is eroding, and multipolarity is returning. In such a world, states do not get what they deserve. They get what they can secure through power. Trump's rhetoric and policies reflect a recognition, sometimes accidental, that the United States cannot dominate everywhere at once. This brings us to why reactions to Trump are so intense. He threatens not just political preferences, but an entire worldview. For many Americans, especially within elite circles, the belief that the U.S. is a benevolent hegemon is central to their identity. Trump punctures that self-image. He exposes contradictions between what America says and what it does. That exposure is unsettling, and it provokes anger precisely because it feels like heresy. Another reason Trump matters is credibility. In international politics, credibility is not about keeping every promise. It's about demonstrating the willingness to use power when core interests are at stake. Trump's unpredictability, which many critics see as dangerous, also creates uncertainty among adversaries. From a realist standpoint, uncertainty can deter challenges because opponents cannot easily calculate responses. At the same time, unpredictability carries risks. States prefer stable expectations, especially in nuclear-armed rivalries. Trump's approach raises serious questions about crisis management and escalation control. These are not trivial concerns, but they exist in tension with a system that already rewards assertiveness and punishes restraint. Let me emphasize another point that often gets ignored. Trump did not create America's strategic problems. He inherited them. Endless wars, overextension, strained alliances, and rising competitors were already baked into the system. Trump matters because he refuses to mask these failures with polished speeches and lofty ideals. He forces a reckoning, whether we like his style or not. If you care about American power, if you care about avoiding catastrophic wars, you have to grapple with realism. You have to accept that intentions matter less than capabilities, and that moral certainty does not shield you from backlash. Trump, intentionally or not, pushes these issues into the open. And this is where I want you to pause and think. Are we better served by leaders who tell comforting stories that don't match reality, or by leaders who expose reality even when it's unpleasant? That question is not about Trump as a person. It's about how states survive in a dangerous world. Let me take this a step further, because the real consequences of Trump's worldview show up most clearly when we talk about alliances and war. Alliances are not friendships. They are temporary arrangements built around shared interests in a specific balance of power. When interests diverge, alliances weaken or collapse. This is not a moral judgment, it is a historical pattern. Trump treated alliances like NATO as bargaining relationships rather than moral commitments, and that shocked people who had grown accustomed to seeing them as permanent and virtuous institutions. From a realist perspective, Trump's pressure on allies to spend more on defense was not irrational. The United States has carried a disproportionate share of the security burden for decades. That made sense during the Cold War, when the Soviet Union posed an existential threat. But after the Cold War, the rationale weakened while the costs remained. Trump forced allies to confront a basic question. Are they willing to pay for their own security, or are they relying indefinitely on American protection? This matters because overextension is one of the most reliable ways great powers decline. History is full of examples: Imperial Britain, Napoleonic France, Wilhelmine Germany, where commitments exceeded capabilities. Trump's skepticism toward endless obligations reflects a concern, whether articulated clearly or not, about strategic insolvency. You cannot deter everywhere, fight everywhere, and dominate everywhere forever. Now let's talk about deterrence, because this is where realism becomes brutally serious. Deterrence is not about goodwill or international norms. It is about convincing adversaries that the costs of aggression outweigh the benefits. Trump's rhetoric often sounded reckless, but his record complicates the picture. Despite constant warnings about chaos, the United States did not enter a major great power war during his presidency. That does not make him peaceful by nature, but it does suggest that deterrence was not fundamentally undermined. In fact, Trump's willingness to threaten force and to frame international politics as a contest of strength may have reinforced deterrence in some cases. States like Iran and North Korea operate in a world where weakness invites pressure. Trump's confrontational style signaled that challenges would be met with pushback. Again, this is not about approval. It's about understanding how adversaries think. But there is a darker side. Deterrence requires clarity about red lines. Unpredictability can deter, but it can also misfire. In nuclear-armed rivalries, miscalculation is catastrophic. Trump's casual language about nuclear weapons and military action raised legitimate concerns among strategists who understand escalation dynamics. The margin for error in great power politics is razor thin. This brings us to the issue of war avoidance, which is often misunderstood. Avoiding war does not mean being passive or idealistic. It means recognizing where your vital interests lie and where they do not. Trump questioned why the United States was deeply involved in regions that do not directly affect its survival. That question infuriated interventionists, but it reflects a core realist principle. Not every conflict is worth fighting. Consider Ukraine. I warned long before the war that pushing NATO into Ukraine would provoke Russia. That warning was ignored, and the result has been devastating. Trump's reluctance to fully embrace Ukraine as a frontline liberal cause aligns more closely with realism than with idealism. This does not mean abandoning smaller states lightly. It means understanding the limits of what power can achieve without triggering disaster. Trump also matters because he exposes the tension between liberal values and strategic restraint. American leaders often claim they can promote democracy everywhere without cost. Reality says otherwise. Military interventions frequently produce instability, backlash, and resentment. Trump's transactional approach strips away the illusion that values alone can reorder the world. Another uncomfortable truth is that Trump resonates with many Americans because he reflects a growing skepticism about globalism. Large segments of the population feel that elites prioritized abstract international projects over domestic stability. Whether one agrees or not, this sentiment has real political power, and ignoring it does not make it disappear. Foreign policy is not made in a vacuum. It is constrained by domestic politics. From a strategic standpoint, this matters enormously. A great power divided at home is weakened abroad. Trump's rise signals internal fractures that rivals can exploit. China and Russia pay close attention to American domestic discord. They understand that legitimacy and cohesion are sources of power, not distractions from it. Now, here's where critics often miss the point. Trump is not the cause of America's strategic reckoning. He is a symptom of it. The liberal order is under strain because the distribution of power is changing. Rising powers challenge the rules that were written when the United States was dominant. Trump's blunt rejection of those rules reflects a recognition that enforcement without overwhelming power is unsustainable. At the same time, rejecting rules without offering a coherent alternative creates instability. This is the central tension of Trump's impact. He identifies real problems but offers inconsistent solutions. That inconsistency is dangerous in a system that punishes missteps. Yet, the old approach pretending decline does not exist is equally dangerous. I want you to think about this carefully. If the United States continues to act as if it can remake the world in its image, it risks provoking conflicts it cannot control. If it retreats without strategy, it invites challenges that undermine deterrence. Trump sits uncomfortably between these extremes, and that is precisely why he matters. Now we come to the hardest question, the one that really matters if you strip away the noise and the personalities. Does Trump make a great power war more or less likely? Anyone who gives you a simple answer to that question is not taking international politics seriously. The truth is more unsettling because it forces us to confront trade-offs that have no clean moral resolution. Great power war is not caused by bad intentions. It is caused by shifts in the balance of power, fear, and miscalculation. When states rise, others feel threatened. When states feel threatened, they take measures to protect themselves. Those measures, in turn, look aggressive to others. This is the security dilemma, and it is relentless. Trump did not invent this dynamic. He stepped into it at a moment when it is intensifying. Trump matters because he disrupts patterns that had become predictable. Predictability can stabilize relations, but it can also lull policymakers into complacency. For years, American leaders assumed rivals would accept U.S. dominance indefinitely. That assumption was wrong. Trump's confrontational posture toward China and skepticism toward Europe signaled that old routines were breaking down. That increases short-term uncertainty, but it may also force long overdue strategic adjustments. At the same time, instability is dangerous. In a world with nuclear weapons, even small misjudgments can have catastrophic consequences. Trump's personal style, impulsive, confrontational, dismissive of expertise, raises the risk of accidents. Leaders matter in crises, and temperament matters. This is not a trivial concern, and anyone who studies escalation dynamics understands why. But here's the paradox that makes Trump so consequential. The alternative to blunt realism is not peace. It is often moralized overreach. When leaders convince themselves they are on the side of history, they become blind to limits. They escalate conflicts because backing down feels like a moral failure rather than a strategic choice. Trump, for all his flaws, does not frame foreign policy as a moral crusade that can reduce the pressure to escalate for symbolic reasons. Let me be clear, restraint does not mean weakness. The most successful great powers in history knew when not to fight. They prioritized survival over righteousness. Trump's questioning of interventionist orthodoxy aligns with that logic, even if his articulation is crude and inconsistent. The danger lies not in questioning assumptions, but in doing so without discipline. Another reason Trump matters is that he exposes the gap between elite consensus and public tolerance for sacrifice. Wars require blood, money, and patience. The American public has grown skeptical of open-ended commitments with unclear benefits. Trump gives voice to that skepticism. Ignoring it does not make the United States stronger. It creates a legitimacy problem that undermines long-term strategy. From a realist standpoint, legitimacy is a source of power. A state that cannot mobilize its population for strategic goals is constrained, no matter how large its economy or military. Trump's appeal reflects a recalibration of what Americans are willing to support abroad. That recalibration will shape U.S. strategy long after Trump himself exits the stage. Now, let's talk about the future, because this is where realism demands honesty. The United States faces a peer competitor in China and a revanchist power in Russia. It cannot dominate both simultaneously without risking disaster. Choices have to be made, priorities have to be set. Trump's instinct to focus on China while de-emphasizing other theaters aligns with the logic of concentrating power against the most serious threat. But instincts are not strategies. Great power competition requires coherence, alliance management, and careful signaling. Trump's transactional approach can weaken trust if it is not paired with credible commitments where they matter most. Deterrence is not just about threats. It is about assurance to allies and clarity to adversaries. This is why Trump provokes such polarized reactions. He forces a reckoning with realities many people would rather avoid. He breaks the illusion that the United States can have everything: moral purity, global dominance, endless prosperity, and zero risk. In international politics, trade-offs are unavoidable. Trump drags those trade-offs into the open. Whether that ultimately reduces or increases the risk of war depends on what comes next. If Trump's challenge to liberal internationalism leads to a more restrained, strategically focused U.S. foreign policy, the risk of catastrophic war could decrease. If it leads to erratic decision-making without a clear hierarchy of interests, the risk increases. Here is the uncomfortable conclusion I want to leave you with. Trump matters not because he is unique, but because he reflects deeper structural forces. Power is shifting. The world is becoming more competitive. The era of easy dominance is over. Any leader in this environment will face hard choices and painful constraints. The real question is not whether you like Trump. The real question is whether the United States can adapt to a harsher international system without stumbling into disaster. That requires realism, restraint, and an honest conversation about limits. Trump forces that conversation, whether we want it or not. So I'll end where I began, with a challenge to you. Do we want leaders who comfort us with illusions, or leaders who confront us with reality even when that reality is messy, unsettling, and deeply uncomfortable? The answer to that question will shape American power and global stability for decades to come.